Welcome to the State Museum of Pennsylvania. My name is Angelica Dokog, and I am the director of this absolutely wonderful place. Welcome to the first of the 3 public programs the State Museum is delighted to offer in conjunction with Seeing Fallingwater, celebrating Pennsylvania's architectural masterpiece. This display opened in May and will be on view through January 5th in Brockhoff Hall, which is just right around the corner. I'd like to now turn over the program to Kurt Miner, Chief of Interpretation and Curator of the exhibit that is on display, who will be introducing our wonderful guests this afternoon and leading the informal discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica, and thank you for everyone who's joining us here this afternoon, which for what I know is going to be an excellent program. The subject of our first talk, our first program in conjunction with our exhibit Seeing Fallingwater, and our special guest is Mr. Paul Bonfilio, the man behind the model. Paul began his career in architecture several decades ago. It spanned over 50 years. It begins in New York City, where he served as urban planner for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He later worked as an urban designer for the Department of City Planning, assistant director at the Bureau of Building Design, and land use director for the Office of the Borough President in Staten Island. Those are a lot of titles and a lot of bureaucratic offices. I know that sounds like government. Parallel to Paul's career as an architect, and I guess I can also say an urban planner, he pursued a passion for model making. It's a hobby, or began as a hobby as a teenager, as I understand it, and Paul will be talking a little bit about that. But his formal career began when he began his architecture studies at Cooper Union. Paul's thesis model garnered the attention of acclaimed architect, and I will butcher this name, John Heideck, and led to commissioned work from other Big Five New York architects. Paul received his first commission from the Museum of Modern Art, also known as MoMA, in 1969 to build the famed Villa Stein house by, again, another name I will butcher, Le Corbusier. He went on to build 6 more models of buildings by master architects, including Philip Johnson, Mies van der Rohe, and of course, Frank Lloyd Wright. Among his most renowned works is a model of Wright's Fallingwater, currently on display here at the State Museum, which Paul meticulously documented in his book, Fallingwater, the Model, published by Rizzoli Press in 2001. Copies of which will be available after the program. With Paul this afternoon is his daughter, Delia Bonfilio, and many other family members who are scattered around the audience this afternoon. Though not an architect, Delia has followed in her father's design footsteps. She is president of Bonfilio Design, a New York graphic design firm. Thank you, Paul and Delia, for joining us here at the museum this afternoon to talk about the spectacular model, I was going to say a half century ago, 40 years ago, that you created. But before we begin our Q&A session, I would like to play the first few minutes of the film that Paul, you and your cohorts had made to document how you fabricated this wonderful model.
Hi, I thought I'd spend some time trying to explain some of the discoveries I made about Fallingwater, and in particular the way Frank Lloyd Wright sited the house on what was probably a very unlikely piece of property. And that is a piece of property that is directly over the falls and is a triangular shaped narrow sliver of land that's bound between Bear Run and the existing road. Bear Run on the south, the existing road on the north, the wooden bridge which was later replaced by a new concrete bridge on the east, and a series of boulders on the west, one of which became the hearthstone of the fireplace and living room. That boulder, together with another one that's located here, it's not shown right now in the model, and a much larger series of boulders up in this direction, really are a limiting point from the western growth of the house. Also, the land kind of slopes very drastically and would probably be very difficult to build a house any further west than this boulder. He picked this very narrow sliver of land, and of course, being that there is a grade change, had to immediately establish some kind of retaining wall. And the back wall of the house, with really no functions down here, there's a small basement area here, a utility room, on the larger piece between a couple of boulders. But otherwise, all of this land really serves no purpose other than the foundations and the retaining wall for the road. He did manage to later put in, later in his design, a plunge pool, which was an interesting counterpoint to the stream. Here you are coming down rather than to the stream, but to a pool, a contained, controlled environment. But anyway, this retaining wall serves to hold the roadway back, and what Wright did then was to build a series of piers which extended, or fingers that kind of extended out into the stream, and they served as the foundation walls from which the bollards are built, where the house kind of grows not only outward but laterally and upward. And this very narrow footprint actually serves as the basis of growth for this kind of flowering of the building.
We will continue to play that film silently in the background, but we will kind of launch right into our conversation with Paul and Delia, and I've got some questions prepared. Expect this will be about 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to the audience and hopefully get some questions from you all as well. Paul, I again, welcome. I want to start by with that first question I alluded to in the introduction. How did you get in the business of making architectural models?
Well, at Cooper Union, when you design a building, they want you to make a model of it. And that's a 5-year program to become an architect. And that's how we all did our work, all the students. I usually worked in plexiglass. The other guys used balsa wood or cardboard. But did you want to know how I got into MoMA?
Well, I would like you to talk to maybe a little bit about how you sort of, before you formally started in architecture, you also seem to be drawn to model making just as a hobby, as a
Sure.
kid.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, not really. Well, that's easy because it's already made. You just put it together. Here you have to create everything, you know, and then put it together, you know. So that's what architectural model making is.
You can talk a little bit about the Fisher body models, and that got you started.
Yeah, so you had made, in this wonderful book, which again, available, shameless plug in the museum store, you talk about how it shows you with a model that you made, I think when you were a teenager, of an automobile.
Yeah. Well, the Fisher Body Craftsmen's Guild, General Motors held a contest from the 1930s up until the 1960s. And it was competition through the whole country. You know, I was in New York. And in the beginning, I didn't do very well. But after about several years, I eventually won in New York State for my model, my design. They even offered me a job, which I didn't bother doing anything about. But anyway, yeah, you have to learn how to make a model out of clay, make a plaster mold of it that falls apart, cast it in plaster, and then you got to sand it, finish it, paint it. The only thing General Motors gave you was the tires for the car. And you also had to sign a release because they stole every design from every kid, you know.
Of course.
It's General Motors, you know.
Yeah,
But anyway, that's what I learned a lot from that, the discipline of how to work with materials and things like that, yeah.
And as not someone who's obviously, I'm sorry.
No, the other models were at school. Like I said, we had to do models. You want to know how I got into MoMA?
Well, I guess what I'm curious about is you were pursuing a career as an architect.
Yeah.
And as I would understand it, most architects, they build a model because they need to,
Yeah.
and then they move on to their other work. It seems like you got interested in pursuing model making in its own right with buildings. Is that right?
Well, Dad, tell the story about how Richard Meyer.
Yeah, you want, okay. When I was in my last year at Cooper Union, John Haydick, who was the chair and also the teacher for that, he had a thing called the 9 square house, 9 squares. I don't know. He was a strange teacher. So all the students had to make a model of that. Most of them made them in balsa wood or cardboard. I did it in plexiglass, and I airbrushed it, painted, made it beautiful.
And what year is this, may I ask?
Jesus, I don't know. I don't remember when I graduated.
1960s.
But in the 60s.
1960s,
yeah.
when I would assume not many people were working with plexiglass.
Now, in the last year there, John Haydick said, he said to me, "You're going to build my models." And I said, "But I'm not a model maker, you know." "No, you're going to build my models." So I started making small models for him. And then he made this big, he called it the Diamond House. And I made that model, and he loved it. He really liked it. So much so, he invited, what's his name? Richard Meyer. Richard Meyer is a very famous architect. What's the school in Brooklyn? What's the thing in Brooklyn? No, I mean, he did the...
He built the Getty.
Right. And he brought him over to see the model. Meanwhile, I put in a bid because MoMA was looking for someone to make a model of the Gertrude Stein House by Le Corbusier.
Okay.
I gave him a bid of something like $3,000. It's not a lot of money. And then they told me, "No, you were the highest bidder," so I didn't get it, okay? A couple of weeks later, I get a call from them, and they said, "We want you to make the model." I said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, Richard Meyer said that you were the only person who could make that model." And that's how I got to make that model. Once I made that model, they were so pleased with it that I kept getting other models of people like, what's his name?
Philip Johnson, the glass house.
Philip Johnson, the glass house, and a bunch of other architects and people.
I mean, you must have felt some pressure knowing
Yeah,
the buildings you were
yeah.
working on.
Then somewhere down the line, Arthur Drexler, who was then the curator who took over, he said to me, he wanted a model of Falling Water. Now, I know Falling Water. I knew Falling Water from a long ways back. And the first thing that came to me, he says, "Oh my God, there's a waterfall, and then there's a river. How am I going to make that? I don't know how I was going to make that." So I have other friends that are model makers, and we all got together to see how we were going to do this. We went to New York to the Museum of Natural History and asked them about, well, you have those those things downstairs. And they said they used this particular material as a liquid and then a catalyst that hardened it. I was not happy with that because I know about that. That stuff would shrink after a while. I can't have something that shrinks. And also, it doesn't make the waves of the water or how the waterfall comes down. So I said, look, we're going to work with plexiglass, which is already cast, it's done, nothing's going to happen. And we'll use that to carve the waterfall and to carve the river,
You were obviously familiar with Fallingwater when you received the commission. Had
Yeah.
you actually ever seen it before in person prior to receiving the
No,
commission?
I did, when they wanted me to make it, the son of the owner gave me a copy of Frank Lloyd Wright's blueprints.
Yeah, that would be Edgar Kaufman Jr., I think.
Kaufman
correct?
Jr., right,
Yes.
correct. And they gave me the keys to the house.
Okay.
I went there. I started out taking the drawings that they gave me at the scale that I created for the museum, which is now a 3/8 inch scale, not 1/4 inch scale, not 1 inch scale. 3/8 inch was the right size. That model is 3/8 inch scale.
Okay.
And I took some measurements. I found some error in the drawing. It had to do with the road at the back. So I had to go to Falling Water, and I measured some stuff up. I had a friend who was a photographer, and he took a lot of pictures of Falling Water, inside, outside, everything. And in some areas, we left a 12-inch ruler, so that when I had the picture, if I didn't measure at the time I was there, I knew I could measure how long, let's say, a wall was or something like that. And that's for the basis. So the model is very accurate. And in fact, I had the drawing, the only as-built drawings of falling water I have. All the other ones are not right. They're incorrect.
Interesting. What was, we talk about in the exhibit about how falling water is a couple things. Certainly it's regarded as Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece, but
Yeah.
we were impressed with how falling water inspires people. And it catches them by surprise when they see it in person.
Yeah.
When you saw falling water for the first time, was there something you remember being struck by that you had not expected, seeing this masterpiece in person and knowing you were now going to be asked to reproduce it in scale?
Well, in my first year at Cooper Union, there's a course in drawing, and one of them was perspective, how to draw perspective and things of that kind. And I knew about falling water, and I chose that as my model.
Oh, is that right?
For the
Okay.
drawing, you know. So,
So you've been doing work on it already?
I have been,
Is
yeah.
it? Okay, great.
I have a whole bunch of books about falling water.
Okay.
But anyway, that's basically how I knew it, yeah.
And again, all visitors are, of course, welcome and encouraged to see the model right around the corner after our talk, but our discussion this afternoon. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the materials that you use for falling water. And if you had chosen any materials for this model that were different from the other materials you used for the other models, because by the time you received this commission, you had already created several other architectural models for the museum.
Yeah, which were all made of plexiglass, usually, you know. But the stonework, for example, is not plexiglass. It's a mixture. It's like a plaster, but
Okay.
it's different, you know. And that's how the walls are made. But you couldn't use those walls to support each floor, okay? Because it's plaster. It cracks very easily. So it's what I call a core wall. So the wall is made out of plexiglass, and then each side it's glued with the stone on either side. So it looks like it's a solid stone wall. Now the stone pattern has to be different. What I did was we took a picture of the typical wall, and I gave it to the guy to make me a form that I could cast of that. So all of the pieces they gave me are all identical, but I couldn't put identical pieces together because it was ridiculous. So I still put it together, but with this particular plaster that's on there, I could convert how the brick looked like, the finish of it. And I could change it, I could turn corners with it. So all the pieces of stone are totally all different, you know, they're not all, but they're made from one single pattern that was altered to make it look like it's different, which it was, yeah.
Didn't you get a stone from the actual
Yeah.
site and it's
Yeah.
placed in the model?
I just told that to
Well, tell them.
yes, I found some pieces of stone on the property, and I found a few of them. They looked good enough to be put into the model because they looked like some of the stonework we did. So I call it the soul of falling water. So the model has some actual pieces from the property, and they look like, you know, you can't tell the difference between them.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Perfect segue for my next question, and this is a big one, but knowing that Frank Lloyd Wright designed buildings to respond specifically to a particular landscape in which they were situated, did that design philosophy influence anything about your approach to this model? Another way to phrase this is, did you begin to feel like you were yourself having to step in the shoes of Frank Lloyd Wright as he was designing this house with this very specific topography? I mean, it's literally over falling water. And I'm going to follow that with a quote from a reviewer of your model book.
Oh, you saw that, huh?
Yeah, this is a quote. "Making the model was almost like having an investment in its original creation, figuring out step by step how to build a house around a boulder, cantilever it over a waterfall, build half the furniture right into it, and somehow make the whole thing work structurally and look drop dead gorgeous at the same time."
Did you read the beginning where he made fun of it? the beginning?
No, but I think that says a lot about
Yeah.
what you must have gone through in terms
Well,
of
I
some of
think
the
did I give
decisions
you
you
a
were
copy
making.
of what he wrote? In the beginning, he made fun of it, really, until he read the book. And then he changed his whole attitude, totally different, which is what you just read.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's great. So as I was thinking about that and thinking about the decisions you were making as you were reconstructing Frank Lloyd Wright's house, one of the questions I had was, to what extent did the site depicted with the house and the model figure into your larger composition for the actual model that you ended up delivering to MoMA? For instance, did they instruct you on how much of the landscape to capture? If not, how did you make that decision? How much did you need?
Well, I used you don't have the picture of it here. Do you have what is it called?
What, the film?
No, the thing that we gave the picture of.
The survey?
The surveyor, yeah.
Yeah.
I used the surveyor's drawing. The
Okay.
surveyor showed where all the trees were, and the surveyor drawing shows the change in the shape of the property. And there's a guy, one of the model makers, who took that drawing and he made a device that followed all of that. And at the top, he had he had the foam work, and he carved the foam work to match what the surveyor did in the drawing. So it's exactly the same. The property is just as accurate as the building.
I think originally Dad wanted to build the
No,
a
no.
guest house in the back,
No,
but
no,
they didn't
no.
want. Oh, they.
MoMA, there's a guest house behind Fallingwater, and MoMA wanted me to make that guest house at some point. So when I made the model, I made room for where that house would happen. When as that road goes up and goes around and meets the guest house, they changed their mind about it. They didn't want to go ahead with it, so I didn't have to do that.
Okay.
But it was set up to handle that, the model.
Were there any other, so that's one detail that you were forced to leave out, it was the guest house. Do you remember any other details about the house or the landscape that you wanted to include, but for some reason you couldn't or did
No,
not?
I included everything that's there. The rhododendrons, the stuff on the ground, the leaves and all of that, and it matches what's there. We took a lot of pictures, and I followed the drawing that was given by the surveyor.
Is there anything that, as you look back on that as well, and that you remember thinking was, gee, this is more than I was expecting to get into?
That happens on every model
I
work
would
on.
think so. Was there anything that was, I'm curious of all the complexity with this model.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me, Paul, before we started the program, that this was the only model for which you had also modeled the surrounding terrain.
Yeah.
The other ones were just of the building, which says a lot, I think, about Frank
No,
Lloyd
but they
Wright.
had some terrain, but they're a lot simpler.
A lot simpler.
Yeah, very simple.
So do you remember anything what was the most, would you say, was the most difficult part of this particular model? Was it the water? Was it the cantilevering?
I think it was the waterfall, right, Dad? The
The
waterfall.
waterfall was a problem, and the river, But like I said, we figured out a way to do that, and it came out very well. It's funny. Just recently, I thought of something else. I said, why didn't we use real water and circulate the water on the river and then come to the waterfall? Then it would go back again, but it's too late now.
Yeah, and museums don't like water in buildings,
No.
so we have no problems with
But that would have been an interesting thing to make.
it. It would have.
Yeah, it would have been.
You did have a chance to make the model again when it was, and I
Well, I
guess,
did.
could you tell that story about the second model you made?
Yeah,
the
there was a
follow-on?
second model that was made by the owner of
Dominoes.
Domino's Pizza.
Tom Monahan.
Tom Monahan.
Right.
And after that model was done, his people contacted me and said they wanted a model of Fallingwater for his museum in, I think it's in, I forgot where it's in, but
I think
anyway.
it was his personal collection.
But
Yeah.
he wanted that model. So here I am now, starting all over again on a 2-year work. It's 2 years to make that model. So I started at some point. I needed the money. I had to fix up some stuff in my house and things of that way. But anyway, I did make that model. It took as much time. But I made a distinction with that model because when I made the first model of Fallingwater, I told Arthur Drexler, Arthur, how about we put some lights in there because there's so much detail inside. There are chairs, tables, and everything, and it's everything, the fireplace, and you can't see it, you know. So I did it for Monahan. I put lights in there, and the bridge had, at each corner, was an embedded light. So when you're driving over it, you know where the end is. And I put lights there. So there's a switch underneath the model. You'd hit that switch on, and the lights go on. And if you get the book, it's on page 74, I think, or 75, I don't know. It has a picture of that model in the dark, and you can see that it's lit up, you know, that you can sort of look inside of it. I mean, if you put a flashlight to this one, you could look in there.
You can, that's right. That's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a few more questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience if they have any other questions for you, Paul. And I want to shift gears a little bit and go back to the idea of model making and how that is happening today. And one of the things that we included with our display, which I hope visitors will have a chance to see as well, is a computer-assisted rendering of Fallingwater by a fellow named Cristobal Vila, who's a Spanish filmmaker who had made a model of Fallingwater about 10 years ago, which is in its own right rather spectacular. It's a virtual fly-through. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this new technology that seems to be displacing models, and like what's gained by it, what's lost.
No, I know some of the guys that work with me do that kind of work, but they're for architects doing, let's say, office buildings, you know, big models of office buildings, and they do it on a computer. And they have a mechanism that cuts it all out of the plastic, and then they put it together. So it can be done, you know. Fallingwater is a little bit different, though. It's much bigger, and it's a lot more detail. It's one thing to do the same thing all the time on an office building, let's say, and another thing with this model, which is totally different. But who knows? I don't know. It may happen one day. It may make it quicker to make, you know. But you know.
On a kind of related note as well, there's computer animation, and of course, even closer to what you've done over the course of your career is 3D printing.
Yeah.
Which, as I understand
I'm sure it can be done. I'm sure it can be done. You have to do it in segments, in pieces.
Right. And
you can't do it as a whole piece.
Right. So what are your thoughts on 3D printing relative and how it impacts the craft of model making? Is it something, if you've seen 3D models, would you say this would have put you out of work?
It could be, unless you learn how to do it.
or is it something that the art of making models by hand has something to that is important that you don't get out of a 3D print model?
Yeah, I'm sure it can be done, and I think it's a lot easier to do it that way. It remains to be seen how it works out, you know. And those who are doing it by hand will have to learn how to do that and then compete with them. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think it's a tool that artists can use, and it just cuts down the time significantly. I think it still requires some hand finessing to those models. I have some friends that work in 3D printing, sculpture, and they always have to still tweak it, and you know.
It's not, hasn't gotten fully, and we haven't talked about AI, so we can certainly say that's probably true. Okay, my last question, Paul, and this is one I want you to think about just for a minute. Knowing that you've made many models of many important buildings, is there one building in particular that you always wanted a chance to make a model of, but never had the chance to do it?
No, I haven't come up with anything.
You have not. Good. Okay.
And if they find it and they want to approach me, I'm going to say, I'm not interested.
Great. Great. Okay.
But anyway.
Great. Thank you, Paul. What I would like to do now is open the floor. If anyone has any questions for Paul and or his family, for that matter.
Any questions?
It can be a family member.
Uh-oh.
So, Dad,
It's my daughter. What?
how was it building a model with little kids running around it?
What's that?
How was building the model with?
Well, there's a story about you.
Oh, me?
I made a model for John Haydick. It was called it was a small model, and she was about 4 years old, and she was watching what I was doing, and I saw a little scratch on the glass. You know, it was glass, and I said, "Let me clean this up." So I took the model. I went to a buffing wheel, which is a bad thing to do. I went to the buffing wheel, which then took it out of my hand and shot it against the wall and cracked the whole thing up. And she goes, "What happened, Daddy?" I said, "Nothing, go away, go away." I was waiting for the blood to come back into my body, you know, and I had to fix that thing. It's a big mistake I made. It just shot right out of my hand because it catched onto it and it was gone. So that's another thing I do, by the way. Nothing can be perfect. So sometimes I purposely leave a mistake in every model I make, and there's one on that model. But you haven't found it yet.
No, but I think you're now obligated to share what that
no,
is.
I don't know. I have to see if I can find it, actually. Oh, that's another thing. Yeah, this is very interesting. When I went to Fallingwater to the house, I was in the living room. I had to measure the window, and I found that one end of the window was 1 inch lower than the other end. So that means the house was sagging a little. They had to repair Fallingwater at one time. Now, what's interesting, when Arthur Drexler, the curator, came to see my model, he saw my model, and he saw the same thing. He said, "Can you fix that?" I'll try to delaminate and fix it. Now, that's interesting. The model behaved in the same way as the actual house. Well, it's still that way now. It's still bent. It's very slight, but
Yeah.
it's there.
And you noticed it.
It's exactly like the real house. So
Great.
that's kind of weird, you know?
That's great.
Yeah.
Great story.
Anyway. Oh, God. What else?
Hi, Paul. I just have a question for you. Out of all the models that
What,
you...
the whole family's asking the questions? Yeah.
I'm Vincent, by the way. I'm his grandson. But out of all the models you've made, which model do you think you resonated the most with, or which model do you think you've felt like you've had the most connection to, or like that you dedicated a lot of years?
What was the first part? Which model what?
Which model do you think you resonate most with? Like, was there like a model that kind of sparked your interest?
I can't. My favorite model?
Yeah. Or like one that like
They're
really,
all my favorite models.
Well, which one would like you feel like sparked your interest for the craft? Like when you throughout your whole career?
The Glass House by Philip Johnson was a nice house, a nice model. Now, what's funny about that is when I delivered the model to MoMA, Philip Johnson was there. And he said, "Oh, no, there's more flourish over here. I made the model exactly it was, where all the plants were and everything." And he claimed that it's not like that, it's this and that. So because I left it out, it wasn't there in the actual house. So he made me, or they made me, put more stuff in there, which is not accurate to the house, but anyway. So Arthur said, "Please, do it, please. Make him feel good, you know."
Are you not grateful that Frank Lloyd Wright was not around when you delivered your model of
I
Fallingwater.
wish he was around. I think he'd love it.
He may have asked you to do something, though.
Well, there's one model would be interesting, which would be this Guggenheim Museum, which pivots around. I wouldn't want to do that one. That's going to be a tough
would
one.
not.
But someone has made a model of that actually, because it twists as you. I don't know if you've ever gone there, but you have to walk up the spiral way up, and to do that in a model would be very tough. You'd have to cast sections of it and then join them together and then make that thing go up. You know.
Indeed.
But I wouldn't want to do it though.
Okay. We won't put your name forward.
No,
for
don't
that.
put my
Okay.
name there.
Great.
Anyway,
As a model maker, what was one of the hardest
another
skills?
family member.
Yeah, all the grin.
What is this?
As a model maker, what was the?
What is it now? What are you
a-
saying?
Like, as a model maker, what was one of the most hardest skills that you had to perfect? Like, one of the hardest skills that it took you to perfect in model making.
What did she say? The hardest skills I had to perfect,
Yeah.
or what? Is that
Like,
what you're saying?
Yeah, one of the a difficult thing that you had to perfect in your models that what took you that.
Well, working with the material, the plexiglass, you have to use a table saw, a drill press,
Dad.
all kinds of things to do
Dad,
to handle it. A buffing wheel, and
why
be
don't
careful.
you tell them how you discovered
Excuse
how
me, there's my other daughter.
Hi. Why don't you tell them how you figured out how to make the rings in the pool, the process of what you did to calculate out how to make the rings in the plastic? Do you
You mean
remember? Do you remember how you would sit at
The
the
ripples
table?
you're talking about? In
How-
the pool or the river?
It was how you used to dip the thing in the tray to make the rings of the pool.
What's she talking about? You mean studied how water. Oh yes, I know what she's talking about because they were little at the time. Frank Lloyd Wright has that pool there at the bottom, and when there's a spout of water, it hits it, and it just makes a design of the how the ripples would go. So in the kitchen one day, I took I had a pan of water, and I would sit there with a pencil doing this, hitting the water to study how the ripples would go, hit the wall, and then bounce back. And they were watching me do this, They probably thought I was crazy. But anyway, so I did that. I studied that. And then I made a drawing of that section, of that pattern of the water. And I took that pattern, put it under a piece of plexiglass, and then I was able to carve the same thing. And I told you that spout's missing on okay. I
Yes.
brought it. I could fix it now.
Okay.
But the spout was a piece of a little plastic filament, Fisher filament that's on when you go fishing on a fishing, the plastic thing. Okay.
Yep.
So that's what I used to make it look like water spouting out of the wall into the pool. And there's another one, the other side, the entry to the house has one of those things there too, because they have a small little pool there. Is that it?
Thank you for coming and doing this wonderful program. I was wondering, what advice would you give to future model makers?
I can't hear. There's an echo. What advice to give to a model maker? Well, it's a discipline. It really is a discipline. And you have to learn how to use equipment to cut stuff and things like that. But be careful because you can cut your finger off, Yeah. And, well, I've hurt my finger a couple of times. I ran it over a blade once, on the table saw. But anyway, it's okay. It's back. Anyway, you have to know what you're doing, and the material. Some things are harder to cut than others, Now, balsa wood you can cut with a knife, and you glue it with glue. The plexiglass, however, there's glue for plexiglass. Once you put that stuff on and you use a syringe to squirt the glue at the corner where one piece meets another. After that sets, you can't pull it apart. If you do, you end up breaking the plastic. That's how strong it is. That model is made like that. However, it's not the floors are not glued together. The floors are actually screwed together, and they're hidden in the wall. And the reason I have screws is because I had many times had to take the walls, the floors off to do different pieces of work on the model, put it back on, and continue. So that's the reason that I had to do it that way. Because if I had glued it together, I'd be destroying the model, trying to get to, fix something, So, and you have to use a drill, and you have to use something that cuts out to take the screw to go into it. So, it's not that hard, though, really. So.
Since I have the microphone, I'm going to ask a question. How did you decide which season to represent on the exterior of the model?
I can't.
Decide which season to.
Oh, yeah. Well, if the season's all before the trees have leaves on them, so all the trees don't have leaves on them. But I can do it. I could have done it, I've done it some on other models.
How did you decide that season? Did it show the house more?
It shows the house more without having that on, true, yeah. But there is the rhododendrons, though.
Right.
We have the rhododendrons in the model. And that was done by taking a very thin piece of metal, and the guy who worked on it punched out with a punch hole the shape of the rhododendron. And he put together the rhododendron shrubs with tiny little holes, and that's what you see on the model there. The trees, however, don't have leaves either. The trees are actual pieces from a tree, the branch, the thin branch. And then you put smaller branches drilled into it to make all of the other pieces that go off of it. Then I would take I had a wonderful woman who did that. And then I would take the tree and give it a coat of gray lacquer first. And then I would paint it a brownish color. And then I took a can of spray paint that you can buy in a store, color black and brown rather. And from a distance, you squirt it to the tree, and it gives this spackle thing like that. And it looks like the stuff on the tree. I'm sorry. So that's how you do that, the tree. I have done trees with leaves, though, and there is a way of doing that also. You spray glue on it, and then you take. I took actual pieces of leaves, crunch it up into. And then you just throw it on there, and it sticks, and it looks like leaves on the tree. So.
Hello. Thanks so much for being here. It's obvious that your family is very proud of you, and rightly so. I'm not a family member. We just happened to come across the program, and it's a pleasure. I just have a quick, maybe a two-part question. Would you consider yourself a perfectionist?
A what?
A perfectionist.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And then my second part would be, how did you know when to stop?
When it looks like the real thing. Yeah, I try to be as perfection as much as possible. Yeah.
I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on this as well, but he really looked at the photographs to get everything real. The travertine floors, the rocks, the stone walls. He would always look at the photographs, and he was like an artist in many ways.
Okay. All right, whatever she said. Anyway. They don't teach you this in school, model making like that. I mean, maybe some schools do, I don't know, but they didn't teach me. They didn't teach me. I taught them.
Okay.
Well,
Paul,
that's
thank you so much, Delia, and your family, audience members as well. I would like to, after our program here, invite everyone over to see the model. I have with me a flashlight you can use to point out some details which Paul was generously pointing out before the program. I'll share that. I also would invite you to visit our museum store for a copy, if you wish, of Paul's book. And we have some upcoming attractions, and I'm going to let Angelica make her way up and talk about the other program offerings that we are going to have this fall as part of our special exhibit called Seeing Fallingwater, celebrating Pennsylvania's architectural masterpiece. So over to you, Angelica.
Thank you again for your presentation. It was absolutely fantastic. Wasn't that great? Such an inspiration, right, for everybody. And this is a lost art, so I'm glad that you were able to talk about it. And for all of you young ones, you could continue the legacy. That would be terrific. But anyhow, as Kurt said, we have 2 other programs that are in conjunction with the Fallingwater exhibit. The next one is actually October 20th, 3 weeks from today. And the featured speaker will be Justin Gunther. He is the director of Fallingwater and also vice president of the Western Conservancy. He will be here to talk about, of course, Fallingwater and its recent designation of a World Heritage Center. So I think that's going to be another wonderful lecture as well. And then the third program will be in November, actually on Friday, November 2nd. And this is in conjunction with the Historic Harrisburg and also the Pennsylvania Historical Foundation. And this is an actual trip to Fallingwater. So it's going to be an all-day trip. So that's going to be very exciting. If you're interested in going to Fallingwater, let me know or let Kurt know. We could give you the information, or actually look on the website as well. There are a few places left. So, so those are, if you need more information on those 2 programs, feel free to contact us or to look at our website. So again, please join us. And then you could also look at our website for other programs as well. So again, we're glad you came, and thank you very much. Paul, thank you very much.
And inside, we can't see the details, but what are some of the things that you want to point out from the inside of the building?
You can see in there, there's chairs, there's tables, but you can't really pick it out here. But it's in there.
The fireplace.
The fireplace is over there on the left, right there.
That's built within the structure of the building,
Yeah.
right?
So, Paul, you built the furniture into Fallingwater in the same way that Frank Lloyd Wright.
I'm sorry. I measured the furniture that was there, and I knew how much was there, and I made, in the book, you'll see a picture of all the pieces of furniture looking down on them, you know, so you can tell. That's the hanging stair. That hangs from the top here. And the way they built it is they had a metal rod that was put into the concrete, and it hung down like that, and each one of those picked up 1 step. Okay, so I made the model exactly the same way. I made a jig that would hold all of the steps by themselves. They all had a hole in them and a hole at the top, and I sent the thing down to it, bent it at the bottom, bent it at the top, and then that's what's holding. That's a real suspended staircase there, just like the real thing. This was quite a job to do. This is how that started, like this, except it was bigger. This is a cut-off piece. So this started like that, and then this had to be carved to give you that effect of water on one side, and the same thing on the other side. Now, when you carve it, it gets dull like that. Then you have to polish it with a buffing wheel to make it transparent again, so you can see through it. And that's how that waterfall was made. The waterfall then went to connect into the river here, and the river was carved also. You see all that stuff here? That's all done with a Dremel. And you just go and you carve into it, and you carve all of that stuff like that. Then you have to polish it again. The polishing gets rid of any sharp edges and makes it round again, and it makes it look just like what you see. Same thing here.
How
Now, another thing is too, when the waterfall hits the water here, it's not glued, it's left, so it's not actually glued to the river, just in case anything might move or something. So it doesn't destruct anything, you know. And it all goes to the back here.
How about this? How did you like place these on top of each other?
The stone?
Yeah.
The stone?
Right here.
Well, this is a sample of the wall. We made we took a photograph of a typical wall, as I said before, and then we made it out of plaster. This is plaster. And I have a form that took this pattern. Now I couldn't use the same thing everywhere because it would be the same pattern. So I was able to change the pattern by either changing something here or changing something here, and then or something joined here. So in other words, I could make it look like they're all separate, different things. One doesn't look like the other, you know. So all of that work had to be done on it. You know, a lot of work to do that. So. But what else? Then there's the windows. Here's the windows. The windows that I was telling you about, that bent down, is that one right here. No, it's that one over here. And that thing, I couldn't straighten it out.
Was that the mistake?
Hmm?
Was that the mistake that you said was in the model? Didn't you say there was a mistake?
Yeah, the model did the same thing the actual house did. You know, this drooped after a while. They had to go back and repair Fallingwater several years ago. Do you remember they had to do that? So, and that's more work. That is, what you see there is brass. It's pieces of brass. It's like a wire. It's a flat wire. You could buy that in stores that sell things for hobbies. And it's all soldered together. Then you have to sand out the soldering, you know, and then I spray painted. Oh, and they gave me a can of paint that they used to do that color. And so that's the same paint, same color as the actual house. I still have that can, actually, by the way, in case you want some. No, I didn't bring it.
Oh, Cherokee red. Yeah.
Now, all of this is foam. It's like insulating stuff, but it's hard. And it has to be carved and sanded. Same thing with all of this here. And these are some steps people probably don't know about that go down to the water. These are the rhododendrons that are, this is how it starts out, how it looks like at first. By the way, rhododendron is one color on the one side and a darker green on the top. So this was a piece of metal, thin metal, and with a punch, they punched the pattern out, and that's how all of these are made. There's a lot of work to do. And there's a little hole in the middle when they pulled it out, and then there's a fine little, you see the fine little branch there? That's fed on top of that branch with the hole in the rhododendron itself. And this is what was shown from the surveyor's drawings. We knew what this angle was and this angle, and the same thing for up above. Like I mentioned before, MoMA was going to do, there's a guest house that's way up on the top here, and there's a road. This road takes you back, and you wander up about it. They are supposed to make that, but then they changed their mind, and they didn't go ahead with it. Typical tree. These are real branches from a tree, the main piece. The rest of the other stuff is glued into it through a little hole. All of these guys here and that, they go into, and then sometimes you fill it in so that it looks like over here. I should use that other one. There's that one. Oh, this is yours. Where's the other one?
I don't know. What's that? What's that?
The one with the red dot.
No.